It's not enough, marketers, to just make the leap. We have to be open to what happens once we do.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're closed off to possibilities. You're closed off to new approaches. You're actually closed off to anything after the quick mental decision or tactical moment that leads to your success. You're looking backwards.
What does it really mean to be a thought leader in B2B? That's what we're here to find out. This is The Notorious Thought Leader, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to generate demand by creating content that builds credibility and thought leadership. In each episode, Erin Balsa helps demystify thought leadership and uncovers how companies are using thought leadership to generate demand. Let's get started.
My guest today is Jay Acunzo, author, speaker, business storyteller, host of Unthinkable podcast, and most recently, co-founder at Creative Kitchen. Thanks for being here, Jay.
Thanks for having me, Erin.
So obviously, you're a total slacker. You should really get yourself together and do more stuff. Just kidding. So I'm a huge fan of your work. I'm so glad to have you on today to
Thank
pick
you.
your brain a bit. But first, I'd love to have you tell me a bit about Creator Kitchen, and especially the listeners who might not have heard about it yet, because it's a really
Sure.
cool concept.
Yeah, so Creator Kitchen it's a membership for experienced, or what I call quality obsessed creators. These are people who have grown like I have, disillusioned by what they see on social media. And when they hear the words like quality and craft and creative growth that we talk a lot about, they don't also need to hear, well, 10x your audience in 10 days. Like, these are people who have a discerning level of taste, who have a service minded approach to their content, whether they're independent or in house. And what we've created for them is essentially both a network of peers that think like that, and also a beautiful little corner of the internet where you're going to be doing your work, newsletter, podcast, writing articles, whatever your craft is, speaking, writing books. You're going to be doing that work anyway. How do you ensure it's much more like the work only you can create? And so we have a collection of features that sound very familiar to lots of memberships, like masterclasses and special guest interviews and co-working sessions and small group discussions and prompts and things like that. But we organize them around what we call menus, because it's Creator Kitchen. And menus are just, how do we accentuate, explore, and master one really powerful creative strength at a time? Not by following someone else's blueprint, but by actually applying what we're learning, or seeing, or stealing from other great creators in the kitchen who are just generous as all hell, giving away what they do. How do we apply that to our actual work? Like, not take a break, go learn, and then hopefully something comes back and helps us, like a course might try, but an actual application of your desire to create more original work. And I think with AI and infinite content, this has just become the most urgent thing we can do, is to make a more personal kind of work, like get our creative fingerprints all over what we're creating.
I love it. And it's not always about 10xing your audience, right? It's super easy to 10x your audience. If I talked about LinkedIn growth, I could 10x my audience in a month.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily obsessed with growing my audience. I'm obsessed with reaching the right people and having like a unique viewpoint. And my husband's so
Yeah.
funny. He's like my biggest fan other than my mother. And he's like, really, he's not a marketer at all. He's a finance guy, but he tracks my growth on LinkedIn way more than I do. And he'll be like, do you know you just gained like 150 followers from that post? And I'm like, oh, like whatever. That's not necessarily like my aim, but I know for a lot of people, it's all about 10xing your audience. So
Well, a
I
lot of
love,
it is it's vanity focused, it's
right.
reach focused. Reach is how many see it. Necessary, but very insufficient to build a business or a career. Like, reach is just how many see it. Resonance is how much they care. And so no amount of reach will guarantee people care. And we're better off mastering that idea of resonance in and of itself, because from resonance comes action, whether it's internally, I've changed my perspective on you, I feel closer to you, I'm a big fan of you, I'm going to pick you and stick with you against the odds, or it's a more visible action, like I'm going to buy, I'm going to share, I'm going to subscribe. Either way, we need people to take action to grow our businesses. So I like to joke that a lot of people are trying to make things grow without making something growable. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's not anything built into this that people go, oh my gosh, this is super useful. This is super inspiring. This is helping me transform the way I think or act. And so what people are doing a lot with our content is they're either falling to comparison traps and kind of like throwing more gray water into this giant ocean of sameness, or they are creating a kind of work that is very obviously hollow or leaky, like people kind of move through it and forget it, and then they want to grow it. And it's kind of like the analogy I use with members is it's easier to get to orbit if you have a well-built rocket. But what most people are trying to do is like duct tape a bunch of cheap parts together and force it to fly. And that creates a lot of spammy feel. That creates a lot of people gaming systems and even winning some vanity metrics that don't come back around to real business or fulfillment. I mean, I've talked to some people who are thinking of becoming members who are like, I have 100,000 followers and I can't stand my own audience because I did all this stuff that worked and I don't like who came my way. Like, I have more to give. I have something specific and original I want to say. I'd like to feel fulfilled by my work and have it help me thrive at the same time. And I'm like, this is not, those are not juxtaposed ideas. Like, it's more important than ever that we do that. And so I'm just trying to give a home for people like myself and my co-founder, Melanie Diesel, who came out of like the New York Times, Time Inc. and HuffPost. And I'm super grateful to work with Mel. We're trying to create a little beautiful corner of the internet for people who adore the craft and want to master it. And in doing so, connect with others more deeply.
I mean, that totally makes a lot of sense to me personally. So let's talk about the word craft. Okay. So
Sure.
you said Creator Kitchen is for content creators who create with quality, integrity, and craft at their core. And you talk about craft on your podcast too. So
Yeah.
what exactly do you mean by the word craft, and why is it something that we should strive for?
Sure. I think it is about three things, but we as marketers, as creators, as business owners, public communicators, I think sometimes we think it's about one thing. The one thing we think it's about is process. You master the process of writing, podcasting, public speaking, developing ideas, pitching ideas, whatever. It's the craft, it's the process. So that's like the workflow, the techniques, the tools even to that you use to guide the work. And more than ever, unfortunately, they seem to be guiding us. It's like, because this exists, I have to do it that way. And that's really dangerous. But that's one element. It's the process. And it's also the most external element. It's the thing that can come from someone else. Like, follow my checklist, or here's what you do, or you were an apprentice and you follow the master and you do it that way. It requires the least amount of you, but there's two other elements that add power to the work. So if you create less stuff, it has more of an impact on others and your business. I mean, that's what we all want, I think, is to have more impact. And so the other elements of mastery, I call it the three P's. Process is what we notice and obsess over. Process requires us the least. It should also emerge as our own process, not someone else's, on the back of the other two P's, which is posture and practice. So the posture is how you see yourself and the world. It's like the messy bag of humanity that you bring with you to the work. It's how you get your creative fingerprints all over your work, your confidence, your vision for your audience and the world and where it's going, your ability to deploy your personal lived experiences into the work as metaphor, as allegory, maybe even as case study, although that's a little tenuous to just say, I did it and you can too. But it's your posture, and then it's your practice. Like, do you ship on a regular basis in a way that improves your craft for you? Not, if this doesn't work, if this isn't immediately commercially viable, I ditch it. But every other week, I write a newsletter. And the reason I ship it every other Friday is not because it's working for my business. I'm happy that it is. It's not because it's contributing to my marketing funnel. I'm happy that it has benefits like that. I ship every other Friday on that newsletter because it's my practice. It's where I get better. It's where I work out ideas, figure out how to tighten my language on something so I can resonate deeper. It's where I just get beyond this idea so the next one is better. Like, I'm shipping because it's my date to ship, not because this is the business driver. It's actually the collection of ideas or IP development process that does drive the business everywhere else I show up, including now sometimes the newsletter, because I've gotten decent at writing. So the process and the practice are often not discussed, not obsessed over the way we obsess over the process. And I think that's to our own detriment, because from those two things, you start to do a type of work that feels like, oh, this could only be Erin. And I so appreciate that. And I love that. And you resonate with me. And maybe even you're among the choice few things in my life that feel like irreplaceable. And there's a word for that, which is my favorite podcast or podcast. Like, I'm going to bring a new marketing show into my collection or a new comedy show. And I'm not looking to move another comedy show out. I'm saying I have 10 shows. Which one feels most replaceable in any domain? Oh, it's that one. I'm going to add this new show now. Like, you don't want to be on the chopping block. You want to feel irreplaceable in people's lives. and with the onslaught of AI, that just gets more important. So yeah, anyways, mastery, process, posture, practice. Of the three, we over index on process, sometimes in a dangerous way.
I don't know about you. I feel like it's honestly not that hard to stand out from the noise because there's so much noise and generic content out there. And I wonder what it is that prevents people from, leaning into posture and practice. Like, why is there so much generic content when it's honestly not that hard? It just takes some effort and, of course, a little bit of talent. Like, why is there so much shitty content on the internet?
It's not that hard, but it's hard because in our brains it's hard. You know what I mean? Like in reality, it's not hard, but because it feels hard to our minds, it is very real. Like there's a lot of maker monsters, I call them. Like on Unthinkable, we've done episodes called Maker Monsters where we just have people submit voice memos and confessions and we stitch it together with music and sound and follow creators as they approach imposter syndrome and grapple with that. Or writer's block is the next one coming out in a few weeks, or shiny object syndrome, perfectionism. Like we have all these maker monsters in our minds. And I'm someone who's wildly privileged. So I try to avoid saying just do this. Like I am white, straight, male, cisgendered from the northeast of the US in an affluent town with great parents and family, great teachers and mentors. Like the door was open for me when I walked out into this earth, and maybe it was ajar and I had to shoulder through the door, and that's my hard work. But there's a lot of people who it feels locked to them, or there's six locks, or there's six locks and a tank of sharks and electric fences in front of the door. And so for people who are not from my perspective or my place in life, like it feels profoundly difficult to put yourself out there to say, yes, I am worthy, to pull from this moment, this observed moment that I think is a good metaphor for what I'm trying to teach my audience. And I will confidently apply that. Or I see this happening in my space and it sits poorly with me. I'm frustrated by that problem and I'm actually going to speak up to it, speak up about it. So there's like, yes, a thin in the execution sense, there's a thin, not even a wall. It's like a little sheet hanging down between us and the action of doing it. But it feels like this really difficult door, locks, fence, sharks in between for a lot of people. And so I think that's why. Like the summary of that is people don't do this more because either they don't know what they're trying to do, or more likely, it feels like I have to put myself all the way on the hook. Because when I follow the best practice or the blueprint and it doesn't work, I can externalize the blame. I can externalize the responsibility. It was that thing. Podcasting didn't work for me. But when I try to do more personal work, when it could come from no one else but me, when I am drawing from my lived experience and it doesn't work, that's scarier. So I think this is about putting ourselves further on the hook and learning to enjoy that tension, use that tension, embrace it. And I think look for different types of metrics to measure our progress towards success as well. Like it has to click into place, the work and the business side. And that's a little bit scarier to do.
Yeah, I hear that. So I'm curious, did any of these maker monsters impact or hold you back at the beginning? Is there any that you've personally had to overcome?
I think there was a pretty long stretch. Like I got into marketing after wanting to be a sports journalist and started in sales actually at Google and then worked at companies like HubSpot and a tiny startup at a VC in content marketing. And I think there was a long stretch where I had been a dreamer and very aspirational in the types of writing I wanted to do in sports. Because you look at the mountain peak and you're like seeing your creative heroes, all these columnists and TV personalities and today you might say podcasters or even YouTubers if you're in sports. And you're like, I'm going to do that someday. And then I got into marketing and I didn't have any model for like, I want to tell emotional, creative, human interest stories, but about this space. And then you get like, congratulations, you're going to be tips and tricks are us. 7 tips and tricks for this, 11 techniques for that, the 6 steps to success, or how to. And even within that work, what I learned is you can be so much more personal, so much more resonant, such a better teacher, even within those things. And I just had lost sight of it. So for a long time, I think the imposter syndrome I felt, I was like, well, I'm in marketing, I'm in business, I'm B2B, I'm at the little kids table of this creative banquet we're all at. I'm not in the media. Like, who am I to say I'm going
Mm.
to host a podcast, and instead of just a parade of experts asking a bunch of advice questions, I'm going to craft a narrative. I'm going to have music and sound design, where I'm going to develop a premise that feels very narrow but ownable and specific, not because it's a topic or a keyword no one owns, but because it's my angle or my vision for the category or the audience. It took me a little while, I think, to get rid of this sense that, like, oh, I have to shrink my creative aspirations. I have to learn from people that look exactly like me with job titles like mine. I can't pull from the absolute best in the world because who am I? I have this job over here, or I'm in this seemingly boring space, quote unquote,
Mm.
boring space. And it took me many years of building side projects to recognize that that's just faulty thinking.
Yeah, it's definitely a mental game in a lot of ways. And some of those mental barriers and hurdles we have to get over are hardwired. It's something that I learned about myself. So if I had to pick my maker monster, it would be, learning to not be such a perfectionist. I'm kind of a perfectionist by nature. I'm super hyper organized and I'm an editor. So, like, I kind of gravitated to that job for a reason. But, every strength that we have, when, in times of stress especially, that strength can lead to, like, a fault. And so for me, like, my perfectionism, which is a strength in many ways in my career, also is a hurdle for me because I'd be, too afraid to share an idea in a big meeting with a lot of smart people in the room if it wasn't fully baked or if I wasn't fully confident on the subject. Of course, I've got over that. I've grown a lot in that area, but that was a huge hurdle for me as a marketer and as a marketing leader. And, I totally get it. So I'm glad that you're having these conversations so that people that are still battling these challenges, they know that we've all battled them too. We've been there. And,
Yeah.
if I could get over my really just being petrified to say something stupid and put my foot in my mouth, if I can
Yeah.
get over that and put myself on air and go on today, I'm doing 3 podcasts. I'm going to host them. I'm going to be on them. I'm sure I'll say a few dumb things, but, like, I'm cool with that now, right? Because, like,
Yeah.
nobody's perfect. And I think that that's a really good motivation to give people who.
We present as very
Yeah.
stiff. I think especially in B2B, we present as stiff. Like, even the
Yeah.
advice that we might share on a microphone, it's so a friend and mentor pointed out to me, like, "Jay, you're really natural on the mic or the camera." And I'd never recognized that about myself, and then it became a creative tool that I'm like, "Oh, I should get good at this." And so I remember the next day I had a podcast interview, and having that in the back of my mind, I became stiff because I was now
Hmm.
trying to be
Yeah.
something instead of just being. And, like, even as a podcaster myself, you learn how to show up, and I hate the word authentic because if I'm feeling bad, but I appear on your show, Erin, I made a promise to deliver for you and your audience. I should not let the whatever snark, negativity, news affect me from delivering on the promise. Seth Godin uses an example I love, which is if you have a surgeon operating on you and they come in and they're like, I'm not feeling surgery today. I don't want to hear that. I know that's authentically how you feel. So authentic is a dangerous word. I like to think of it as I want to show up and I am the starter to the dough I'm baking today. So I want to start with something about me that could come from me and imbue the work with a sense of personal perspective, which in a performative sense is manufactured. Like, I'm talking to someone tomorrow. I've talked to them before on their podcast. They're coming on mine. They have such good insights. The problem with this person, and I don't want to name names, is they're very stiff on the mic.
Hmm.
And so what I know I have to do when they arrive is hang out for a little while. And instead of saying, okay, ready to record, 3, 2, 1, record, now it's a moment, now they get stiff, or they hear like a PR teammate in their ear saying, don't say this, don't screw up. What I'm doing with them is I'm gonna chit chat like we are now. And I'm gonna say, oh, by the way, I'm just gonna do this now. I always forget to hit record. I'm just gonna hit record now. I'll hit record. And Riverside does a dramatic countdown, 5, 4,
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, which I hate because it makes it more of a dramatic moment to start the performance, right?
Right.
So I'm
Right.
gonna bury that in our catching up. And on the back end of recording, I will continue to catch up. And then I might try and see, are they stiffening up anyway? Okay, I'll say to them, I'm going to engineer your levels. What would be your last meal on earth? Or do you have any pets at home? I'm going to ask them a personal question that feels fun. And you can see their shoulders drop, their smile goes up, they get light, they talk like themselves. And I say, I'm engineering your levels. And I'm not. I'm not engineering any technical thing. I'm engineering them. I'm creating an environment conducive for them to be quote unquote authentic,
Mm-hmm.
but to deliver on the promise they made to me and my audience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me because none of us feel on every day. I know I sure don't. I have bad
No,
mornings with my kids. They're acting up. I'm like 5.5 months pregnant right now. I feel like a giant, like miserable,
congratulations.
I can barely bend over. Thank you. But like I try to bring my best energy because I owe it to my guests who's giving their time. I owe it to the listeners. I owe
Yes.
it to myself. Like, why am I doing this? Like you talked about your, newsletter and podcast. And for me, like I'm a solopreneur, so I work on long engagements. I can only work with 2 to 3 clients at a time. So I don't do this because it's going to get me clients. I already have a wait list. I do this because this is my craft. I enjoy it. I care about helping. I care about learning and understanding this space of thought leadership and getting to talk to cool people like yourself and hopefully helping others along the way. And I think that is an important piece that might be missing from some creators who do things. And it's really clear that they're doing it only for like a selfish reason and they're not having a lot of fun. And that is something that I can pick up on pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's something in the water right now, Aaron, where like every time I have interviews like this, really quickly we go from talking about this category, this topic, this domain, this niche or job function to the people showing up in the work. Like the who behind our content has never mattered more than it does today. I mean,
Hmm.
think of the list. Like generative AI has made commodity content's value zero. It's not worth creating it. If it's general expertise on an expected set of topics, AI is your replacement. If you imbue all that stuff with your personal perspective and your lived experiences, AI is your intern. I mean, you're like wild, dichotomy there. Social media companies have figured out the game for their own business, which is if we incentivize this type of content and then spread it, we will have more monetizable ad inventory. So like to create awesome stuff on social media is actually to create free ad inventory for these enormous companies to monetize. So they will subtly and sometimes not so subtly draw us that way,
Hmm.
incentivize it. Or even just like the infinite choice we have where clients, employers, subscribers, listeners or they're looking to cut anything that doesn't feel deeply resonant with them. And so there might be a moment where you face this choice. And I think there's this like bright line dividing creative people and communicators today where it's a philosophical fork in the road. Some think the job is about creating content. Others know the job is to create connection. And that's what the content is for. But if you hear 10x your content in 10x the time or, 10x less time, move faster, create more stuff, content, containers on a conveyor belt, you're thinking the job is to create content. Take the thing, chunk it into 20 little things, and put it in 15 different places. But the job is actually not to do that. The job is to create connection. And there are different metrics, there are different approaches, there's a different way of seeing the world, which is better for business. Like, that's the rub in all this. It is most of us are not P&G. Most of us don't sell soap that could be sold by any competitor brand. Most of us have some kind of personal perspective or have some kind of stake in deepening relationships, not just high volume throughput all day long, which is, the domain of monster companies that have the scale to win doing that. Most of us are actually in the resonance business because most of us need not just an active audience, but a loyal audience, a group of super fans that evangelize us, that get us new business for free. So whether you think like I do, which is I love the philosophical, the creative, the big ideas, or you're just a cold hard capitalist, I think either way, embrace that you're in the business of connection. You're in the business of saying something that matters and deepening a relationship with whoever's on the receiving end of your work, which by the way means internal stakeholders too. That's our domain. You are in the business of connection, which means you're in the business of resonance, not reach.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that every decision you make, whether you think of yourself as a creator or a marketer, because I know that there are differentiations and a lot of people think of themselves more as like a professional. Like I have a job as a marketer or I am a freelance content marketer. And other people kind of put themselves in that bucket of creator. As we both know, there's a lot of overlap. Like I do both. But whether or not you're thinking of yourself right now as a creator or someone who has a job to do content or marketing, I believe that every decision you make, from how I choose to craft the content to how I choose to deliver these content experiences to my audience, will impact the level of trust and affinity that you're able to build. And it will impact how deeply you're able to resonate with your audience, like you said. Speaking of resonating, your mission is to help creators resonate more deeply. So, tactically, I know we've talked about a few things on a pretty broad, high level. If you were to actually sit down with someone and give them tactical advice on, okay, here's how you can resonate more deeply, where would you begin?
Let's make it really, really, really small to get started there. I think, like, imagine we were teaching, what's a good example? Imagine we were teaching people to take more risks in their career. Maybe that's our whole platform and our whole deal, or maybe it's just the thing we're writing or speaking about today. Okay, we're going to teach you how to take more risks at work, and it's going to benefit your career or your business's growth. Great. So there's 4 ways we could probably do that. The first is instruction. The first is just do this, then that, then that. And while potentially useful, that's the commodity content I was warning about, where that could be from anyone and you happen to be anyone. So it's scary to do work like that, although we might not see it this way, because the only way to sort of connect, or at least to try and hopefully win business doing it that way, is you have to rank number one. You have to have the broadest possible reach, fame, awards, all that stuff, or you have to temporarily like go viral. It's really exhausting work. It's inefficient too. It's very expensive because everyone is saying that, do this, then that, instruction. You're not present in the work. Anybody could have created it, and you got to reach your audience before someone else does because you're both saying the same thing. Again, could be useful, but the source of that information doesn't matter. Hard to build a business, hard to build long-lasting fans, etc. So it's flat advice or prescription. It's instruction. The second way we could say that might be illustration. And that's more like an example or case study that looks like the people you're speaking to. So in the corporate world, you sell software to help people run their social media marketing. And somebody says, I'm from healthcare. Do you have any healthcare customers? Do you have any healthcare case studies? Right? It's, I want to see a one-to-one, very direct and close comparison, or not even comparison, a blueprint, or just proof that if I bought from you, whatever you do, whatever you sell, whoever you sell to, that others exactly like me from a very superficial level, like demographics or industry or job title, have done so in the past. Again, useful. But when you're communicating to people, I don't think that's necessarily the most powerful. Like a really quick example there is we have a member in the Creator Kitchen named Brian Piper. He is a marketing leader in higher ed. He gives a ton of talks every year. He's written a great book called Epic Content with Joe Polizzi. And as a member, he'll talk to us occasionally about he loves skydiving. And he wants to pull from skydiving to teach topics about content and UX and data to higher ed marketers and other marketers. And he always hesitates to do that. And so when he gets on a stage, when he tells a personal, and I'm using air quotes, personal story, it is simply illustration. It is, I work in this business. Here's how I have done it in the past. The problem with that is you're not considering how the shelf life wears away. Like a great other example is I talked to another member who just left a big brand and is continuing to tell the story of how fancy their previous job was on stages and on podcasts. And I'm like, David, this is really dangerous because the longer you're not at that company, the less that story matters. So I know it's an illustration pulled from your own life, but it's getting weaker by the day, right? So, okay, you're just recounting your LinkedIn experience or one moment that looks exactly like what your audience is trying to do. It's illustration. But there are 2 other like gears to get to, 2 other tiers of power to resonate deeper. And that is metaphor and allegory. So metaphor is just a comparison which reveals a lesson. So with Brian, it might be like, okay, I skydive all the time. I want to teach you to take risks in your work or in your marketing. When you skydive, there's this moment that you all experience, especially first when you first go, which is you got to make the leap. You got to jump out of the plane. And the more you make those leaps, the easier they get. So you back in your work in marketing, we're not talking skydiving. Here's the comparison. You got to make the leap. And it's like, okay, yeah, no kidding. Like, it's a pretty obvious insight, a pretty obvious comparison. So maybe you make it not obvious to resonate deeper. You can say, all right, well, here's something you'd only know If you lived what I lived, the moment, the hobby, it was a thing you remember or a thing you love and do often. But the question to get a little more resonant is, what is something from your life or your area of passion or pain that unless you lived it the way you did, you wouldn't realize it? Because I could observe a skydiver and go, that's a good metaphor for taking a leap in your work, right? It's obvious. You're not resonating that deeply. It doesn't feel that personal or emotional. So Brian might say, okay, I skydive quite a bit. There's this moment after you make the leap where, like in a tandem dive, your instructor taps you on the shoulder, and that's your moment. That's your cue to open your arms and legs as you fall. And it makes for a better fall, right? A successful dive. Okay. It's not enough, marketers, to just make the leap. We have to be open to what happens once we do.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you're closed off to possibilities. You're closed off to new approaches. You're actually closed off to anything after the quick mental decision or tactical moment that leads to your success. You're looking backwards. It's not enough to make the leap. You have to be open to what happens once you do. Non obvious and powerful. It feels profound. That's a great metaphor. And the last and really quick evolution of this to really command a room, digitally or otherwise, to really inspire and resonate deeply and personally with others is to use your personal lived experience to create allegories. And the difference between a metaphor and an allegory is simply that a metaphor is a comparison to deliver a lesson. An allegory is a story. So instead of I skydive and in skydiving in general this, it is, hey, the other day I just had my 500th jump. I flew to Arizona. There's a sense of character and setting. There's forward progress. There's sequences of events. And crucially, you raise the stakes. You know, you're like, and so I got up there and this thing happened and then that, and I was thinking this and I was feeling this and they said that. And at that moment, this happened. And that made me realize in our work, it's not enough to do this. We have to do that. Yeah, I just gave you like no real content in there. And hopefully some people are going,
No,
that was,
I love it.
you
I
made a
took
good point.
You made a great point, you know?
Even though I
Pat
said,
yourself
don't do this, do that.
pat yourself on the back.
Right,
Ryan
right.
Piper, if you're listening, I really think that you should hire a videographer to jump out of an airplane with you, and you can give some lessons while
There
you're,
you go.
flying down, hurling down to the ground.
There you go.
So you talked about instruction, illustration, metaphor, and allegory.
Yes.
Would you say that, could you treat this kind of like a diagnostic if you were a creator and you could try to level set, understand where you are, and then slowly build up to each different level? Would that be like a good way to approach it?
I think so. I think what most people do is they start with instruction. I certainly did, which is, okay, I'm writing for a blog that is owned by the employer I work for, software company. We sell tools for marketers. I'm going to write about how to do marketing and all the more specific variations of that idea, right? And so you start saying things that sound pretty generic, that sounds like a chatbot just spit it out to you. Like, everybody knows the importance of being authentic in your marketing today. 6 questions to ask yourself to be more authentic. 6 steps to grow your Twitter following, right? It's very generic. It's generalized expertise. There's nothing personal for me as an audience member to like latch onto and go, wow, you're really speaking to my soul. And oh, by the way, if I white label this, I could tell it's you. Like there's something about this that feels personal and emotional and connects to my lived experience. And I want to go with you instead of whatever, even your biggest competitor, because they don't hit me the way I need to be sort of hit and lit up to be loyal. So everyone starts, I think, for the most part, with instruction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could go to illustration, which is like,
Once
well,
you have
I've done something.
experience, yeah.
I have experience. Yep. As you do this more, you move from instruction to, well, in my career, I am now the case study. And that's a form of personal storytelling. It does help you differentiate, except there's a whole lot of maker monsters that come out of the woodwork and go, but who are you? That's not that notable. Or there's biases you don't anticipate, you don't see. The biases go away a little bit, not all, but a little bit when you use a metaphor or an allegory, because you're not saying, I lived the blueprint, here it is. And people go, okay, that's nice and all. Like all these bros tweeting on like your morning routines or posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you clearly don't have kids. Or if you do, you're not an equal partner as I am with my wife. Like whatever the case is, there's a bias there. And maybe there's no malintent, but you're not acknowledging it. You're like, I have the blueprint because this is what I do. So you do it too. Completely validating for some people like you and invalidating for people who aren't like you. I want to be clear though, can be useful, right? Like people
Yeah,
ask
you can
me,
10x your audience.
People ask me how I construct stories, I will tell them. But what I'm also looking for is that like meta level underneath my example, which is like, okay, so the universal then might be this. So I do it this way, but the reason I do it that way is I'm asking myself this question. So you can steal the thing I do, or you can ask yourself this question and find your own version of it, which might apply to your world in a more contextualized manner than just doing my technique. It's the reason why something works that we want to learn, not simply what works. That's what gives us, I think, a greater purview over the work, greater ownership over the work. And so that I think we go, as we get experience, we go from instruction to illustration. There's a lot of problems with that. And I think we can skip that. And no matter our experience level, go to metaphor quicker. Go to allegory. Like as a speaker and an author, I have a short bag of stories that some come from other people that I've worked out on my show or my newsletter that make the book and the speech. And some come from my own life that I've told occasionally and then over time got better and better at telling it. And they're not my end-to-end story, but it's like the story of when I quit Google. There's a lesson there for makers. There's a story of when I went to a pizza place and learned why a pizza place that's down the street from its biggest competitor can be original even still with access to the same ingredients. How does that happen? Like all these stories I have, it's a short list. I could probably rattle off 20 at most that feel like these are ready for prime time. But what you get good at doing is you get good at like, what's the metaphor version, quick comparison, and then what's the allegory? I'm going to place you there and I'm going to raise the stakes. I'm going to take you on a journey to the lesson, not just quickly compare something I experienced to something you experienced to help make a lesson clear to you. And so as you go to metaphor, now you're like, everything is inspiration. It doesn't have to be something notable. The best storytellers, they see a leaf fall to the ground, they look down and they go, that's a thing I'm noticing. Could that be a thing for my work? Right?
Yeah.
I have no idea what I'll do with that. Maybe I'll log a couple of lines to jog this memory next week if I write. So everything becomes material, everything becomes inspiration, and everything can be communicated with greater power if you don't think, well, I have to have lived something relevant to my audience or notable to them, because the topics can be completely unrelatable and the story can still hit, because the most relatable part of your story is the emotions, which are human and therefore universal. So I think the punchline to this huge rant here, Erin, is that your personal stories, when you're in our line of work, aren't actually about you. They're about the thing you're there to say. In other words, they're about the audience. And I take hope in that, because that means any of us can communicate with greater power. We don't need to have been some, media crowned celebrity or have done something groundbreaking for our words to hit hard.
You're absolutely right. You don't have to all have worked at Google or HubSpot. Some of us never did. Some of us, worked at small startups, but we can still make deep connections and build thought leadership through some of these techniques. And I'd like to share one. I try to lead with metaphor and allegory in all of my newsletters, because before I share an actual insight about content marketing, or before I share some tactical tips, I always set it up with a personal story. And like you said, the leaf falling to the ground, it's things that happen in my mundane, day-to-day, suburban soccer mom life, but yet they were interesting in some way. And I don't initially identify them as newsletter fodder. But when I'm sitting down to write and I'm like, oh yeah, one morning my 6-year-old at the breakfast table was using a straw to de-stem her strawberry. And of course I was horrified, because I'm the one that has to wash that straw. And we all know how hard it is to get gunk out of a straw. Penny, why don't you give that to mommy? Mommy will use a knife. Because she was watching YouTube and she saw this, YouTube influencer showing this great new way to de-stem your strawberry. Why use a knife when you can stick a straw in it? That's so much better. And the whole lead into my actual content marketing lesson was, from her perspective as a 6-year-old who literally knows almost nothing, it was a great idea. From my perspective as a 42-year-old who's been washing dishes for almost my entire life, fucking horrible idea. And so that translates well into a content marketing lesson. I'm sure you can already kind of know the punchline, right? It's like, be careful whose advice you follow.
Yeah.
And if you're new, you're going to be more gullible and think that tactics and advice are going to work for you.
Right.
And they don't always. So I love to kind of, find those stories. The last newsletter was about my neighbor who has like 19 chickens, and I found a way to tie that into a setup for a podcast episode. And I think
It's
it's
great.
fun. For me, it keeps it fun. I can't imagine sitting down on top of all my client work, on top of all the shit I do, to write this newsletter that was just tactical and heavy. Like
Yep.
that would
Yep.
not be fun for me. Like
Right.
finding ways to talk about the chickens and the strawberries makes it fun. And I think it not
Yeah.
only makes it fun for me so that I have the motivation to stick it out and keep doing it consistently over time,
Right.
it makes it fun for the readers. And ultimately, hopefully, it makes the lesson more sticky. It's not like a lesson where they read it and it goes in one ear and out the other. They can remember, oh, yeah, like Erin's daughter with the strawberry, or oh, yeah, like the crazy chicken lady and her soap. It's all about creating that mental picture that's going to stick around
Right.
longer than the average a bit of advice.
Yeah, I like to stack these things. It's almost like there's the biggest, which is the overall piece. There's something smaller, which is the metaphor that allows you to get into that overall piece, which teaches you the nuance of whatever you're teaching or saying. But then there's like a turn of phrase. So what I love is, it's almost like the order I go with is medium, small, large. Let me explain. So medium, I was checking the Lakers score the other day. I'm not a Lakers fan. I was just curious about how the game went. And I knew I didn't want to spoil the Knicks game because I'm a huge Knicks fan. They're in the playoffs. They've been bad for a while. Super excited about the Knicks. And I didn't want to spoil the game because I was going to watch it on delay. So I just went to Google, typed in Lakers score. Right at the top, there's the score. Now, foolishly, what I did not assume was they will also show the scores of other NBA games underneath that. And so right away, without even seeing the numbers, I see a little black caret pointing to the Heat, not the Knicks, which told me the Knicks lost.
Bummer.
Okay. Before that instant moment, the possibilities of that Knicks game were endless in my mind. Anything could have happened in that game. Any amount of points, any awesome moment. The building could have caved in. The Knicks could have won or lost. There were so many more possibilities without this algorithm giving me the answer, right? And in the moment, it didn't take long. In the moment it gave me the answer, all those possibilities went away. I'm thinking to myself, that's a perfect analogy for creating content today. Because what we're doing is instantly, we're looking for someone's right answer. Do this, do it that way. Or we're looking at an example we admire. We're like, I'm going to copy that. And by looking outward instead of inward when we start to create and tell stories, we immediately remove infinite possibilities that could have come from you, that you could imagine in that moment. So I called this little idea for a future post Schrodinger's content. Right? You have Schrodinger's cat. If you're sitting on a box with a cat in it and there's a toxin with the cat, at that moment before you look, the cat could be alive or dead or anywhere in between. Like the possibilities are kind of all true until you look at it. So Schrodinger's content, like Schrodinger's cat. Today, I want to talk about why instead of looking outward for our ideas, we should look inward when we start. Okay, that's the medium, the Lakers, Knicks, Schrodinger cat thing. That's the metaphor. Then the small. It's a little handle you can hold on to, a lesson, a theme that you remember, which is like a space bag for your brain, as my friend Tamsin Webster likes to say, that all you have to remember is instead of starting outward, start inward. Instead of starting outward, start inward. Like Jay's example of the Knicks score being spoiled and Schrodinger's content/cat. Okay. And then the rest of the piece is large, is big, is paragraphs, is an episode, is a video, is a speech, is an interview on a podcast. So I go from medium, which is the metaphor, to small, which is like, what's the pithy sum up or tweetable moment that I can give you? Not as a replacement, but as a handle to hold on to, then to access everything. And then let's go into all this nuance that comes in behind it.
Love it. Super actionable and tactical. And also, it's kind of fun to interview because I feel like I'm in an episode of Unthinkable, the way you're just like talking. It's pretty fun. Any listeners who listen to Jay's podcast, you know what I'm talking about. This has been awesome. We are coming up on time. So if you were to leave our listeners with any one tip or piece of advice, be it personal or professional, what would that be?
Don't be the best, be their favorite.
Ooh.
I think a lot of us spend a ton of time trying to be the best, trying to be number one. We're looking for some objective or academic proof or status that we can, I just interviewed somebody from the UK, status, that we are the best. What's the best Disney film of all time?
It depends.
Yeah, right. It's when I say this is the best film, by the way, the answer is a Goofy movie. I will take no questions or comments at this time. I'm saying it's my personal preferred pick because of a specific purpose. That's where we all want to be. Like humans are irrational, subjective creatures that make choices based on emotion and rationalize it after the fact. We want their irrational, positive biases to flow to us, right? And that's about being personal. That's about being among the choice few things that feel irreplaceable. My favorite shirt, not objectively the best shirt. My favorite sports team, I mentioned the Knicks. They've been terrible for years. They were still my favorite. They're not the number one. I'm not just randomly switching because I have a personal connection there. Again, if the job isn't content, the job is connection. And it's through our content that people feel that. Then the result is people don't declare you're the best. They might say that, but what they're saying is you're my favorite. And I take such hope in that because we don't need more resources. We don't need to be objectively the biggest or objectively the best. That one doesn't exist, by the way. What is the best Disney film? There's no objective ranking. Even if someone comes up with a methodology, you can disagree with it, right? So we do all these weird things to try and be the best. That's not how people make choices. That's not why people would pick you, and that's not why people would stick with you. If you want to resonate, if you want to have a group of passionate fans that support you and your aspirations, don't be the best, be their favorite.
Mic drop. Great way to go out. Jay, if people want to follow you, where is the best place for them to do that?
If you're listening to this show, you're a quick movement away to Unthinkable, which is my show for creative people about themes like what we talked about today through stories of other people and myself. And if you're interested in the membership, it's creatorkitchen.com. And I'm happy to offer, a $100 discount. Someone just contact me if you want to join. I'm happy to do that for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Erin.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Notorious Thought Leader. If you're looking for more stories from marketers who are generating demand from thought leadership, then visit us at motionagency.io/notorious. See you next time.